It is the 6 months later, this panel was here, and the discussion is the perspectives on the current economic status crisis. I'll introduce the speakers for you. First is Susan Moore, JD. She has worked as a financial planner and stockbroker for Wall Street investments firms for nearly 25 years. In 1991, she started her own practice in Alexander City, affiliating with Raymond James Financial Services. In 2006, she had adopted the name Moore Wealth Management Incorporated and changed her affiliation to Linsco Private Ledger, the largest independent broker-dealer in the country. For the past 15 years, Moore has practiced in a weekly radio show called The Comfort Zone. Our second speaker will be Dave Dennis. He is the president of the Specialty Contractors and Associates Incorporated in Gulfport, Mississippi, a commercial and industrial subcontractor. He was appointed to the Board of Governors to the New Orleans Federal Reserve Board in November 2001 as a representative from the business community. In December 2002, he was elected and served 3 terms as chairman of the New Orleans Federal Reserve Board. Our third speaker is from Auburn, Montgomery. Dr. Kevon Durrani is a special assistant to the chancellor and a professor of economics at Auburn University, Montgomery. He is the architect of the Alabama economic model, which is used to generate forecasts for state major economic variables. Over the past 18 years, Dr. Durrani forecasts have utilized by every administration in developing annual budgets presented to the Alabama legislature. His research interests are in the theory of monetary policy, foreign exchange markets, and regional economic modeling techniques. He is the author of many journal articles, and the research papers have appeared in a wide range of prestigious economic journals. I present our panel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you. I tried to make it very quick, very fast. I talked for about 10 minutes about the mystery of the universe, about the global economy, the U.S. economy, the Alabama economy. I'm going to make it very, very fast. But, however, let me tell you what we know. And let me tell you then, proceed with what we think we know. And then I will tell you what we don't know. I will make things up, basically. Let me tell you what we know. This is what we know, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a different type of a correction. This is a different type of a recession. This may not be a recession, really. It may be a reset. It may not even be a reset. It may be a revisit of everything that we have known and everything that we have practiced, more so than since 1980 than otherwise. There are certain times in history of economic process that they make their mark forever and ever. One was FDR, when he came in and brought a host of new programs that changed the whole horizon of economic thinking. Second was President Reagan, when he introduced and unleashed the animal spirit in us, called the free market system, without any safety nets or regulations or anything of that regard. And the third probably is what we're living in. So we're living in history as we speak. There will be books written, there will be theses done, there will be many, many, many articles done about this for years to come, trust me. But this is what we know. We know that this is, again, is a very, very broad-based recession, meaning that there is no sector of the economy which is spared. Every sector is being impacted by it. This is global in nature, meaning that all nations are suffering with it without any question. For example, Japan is reporting somewhere close to about 6% drop in GDP. Japanese, about 2 weeks ago, reported about 40% drop in exports. UK is reporting 6% drop in GDP. Germany is reporting 6% drop in GDP, so you can see it everywhere. Singapore, which was the shining star of Southeast Asia, is basically at standstill. Chinese are reporting 6% growth in GDP. For them, that's a recession. They have to grow at least 8% to maintain their status quo. Another thing that we do know is that this is going to leave a very, very, as I shared with you, a very deep mark that for some time we will try to figure out what they did and what happened. This also, we know that the GDP, the measure of economic activities, has declined by 6.3% in the fourth quarter of 2008. We are projecting GDP to fall another 6.6% for the first quarter of 2009. We are predicting the GDP to fall another 3.8% by the second quarter, and another negative 1% by the third quarter. So what we're predicting is 4-quarter GDP drop, which is, we never had it since the post-war period. We are predicting that unemployment rate probably would reach somewhere between 9 to 10% for the United States before it begins to stabilize. We are losing, this is what we also know, we're losing about 600,000 jobs every month. So over the last 4 months, we lost about 2.4 million jobs. This is the fastest clip that we have had for some time. If you look at individual numbers, we've seen that consumer spending dropped by 4% over the last quarter of 2008. Export in the United States, import dropping by about 28%. Investment dropping by about 24%. So you're seeing numbers that these are really big numbers for us and totally alien numbers we haven't seen before. So this will go on. The economy had not stabilized yet. We began looking at the job losses in the last 2 months. And job losses are not contained only to large firms. Small and medium firms are shedding jobs even faster than large title-grabbing sort of industries or firms. So again, as I shared with you, I think that it's a long time before we can stabilize this economy, at least maybe 6-7 months. Hopefully, that's what people who are much better economists tell me at this point. But where's the problem? The problem is, at the heart of this problem is, we have to stabilize the housing sector and we have to stabilize the banking sector, and the two are intertwined and connected at every aspect of the way. As long as we have deflation in the housing market, meaning that the housing prices are falling, it's going to adversely impact the balance sheet of the banks, and the balance sheets of the banks will be under a lot of questions about its validity regarding its safety. Mortgage-related securities are strictly and completely parked into the bank's balance sheet. And as long as the value are dropping, as I shared with you, it's going to be hard for us to assess what the banks are worth looking at. Somehow we have to stabilize the housing sector. And somehow we have to bring transparency to the banking sector before we can get this going. President had come up with a tremendous amount of ideas. Whether those ideas would work or not, only time can tell. But I can share some of my thoughts with you very quickly on that. The stimulus plan, $787 billion. 34% of that is tax cut, another 34% is for the states to maintain the status quo. So there's about 24% of job creation mechanism in place. Maybe too little, maybe too small, and too spread out in order to really have an impact, in my opinion. Secondly, the proposal that he has on the table with regard to the banking sector, which is to do a bank test and start making loans to the private and public sector, is not geared, in my opinion, to repair and recover the banking sector. Is more to put the banking sector in life support and hope for some sort of miracle to happen. So, in some sense, now, I believe that a much more dramatic action was required, something that Professor Krugman had probably proposed, which was nationalization of some of the major banks. But we have a phobia about nationalization, so that aspect will remain out there. Thirdly, the budget that the President had proposed for 2011 is a heck of a budget, which is tremendous aspect of social engineering in it, meaning that rather than creating income, they're transferring income. Rather than creating jobs, they're just creating special programs. And at the heart of it is this, and that's what I'm going to stop in a second, but at the heart of it is this: we can't spank the capitalists. You can't bring him in and slap him and sort of, spank him and send him back to work and say, go get it done now. That doesn't work that way. You cannot blame the capitalists for everything, even though they were at the helm. It wasn't them who wrote the rules. They played the game by the rules given to them. You cannot you cannot ridicule the bank presidents. You could, but it's going to work in your disadvantage. You cannot ridicule the CEOs of this and that organization and the CEOs of this and that bank and spank them and send them back home. The treatment that the CEOs of the major three automobile makers received at the Capitol was just amazing, just simply amazing. The point that I'm trying to make is the capitalism works. Capitalism did work. It was just we didn't have any judge and a jury and umpire to write the rules and manage the game, and the game got out of control. It doesn't mean the system does not work, but this system requires a lot of mending, a lot of attention for it to come back. And when it comes back, it's not going to be globalization to the extent that we have seen it. It's not going to be the expansion of the global trade the way that we have seen it. Different rules would be necessary, different regulations would be necessary. As President Obama said himself in G20 meetings, the world cannot rely on the United States to be the consumer of the world and to pull everyone out of it. This is going to be a new ball game with the new rules and new regulations. I'm going to stop there again, very general ideas, but at the end probably we'll have some time to talk about questions on it. Thank you very much.
I had a great presentation laid out. You've opened the door for some extraordinarily great comments about stimulus and other things. Susan gave us 10 minutes. I'm going to give you a very rapid fire of just several topics, and then we'll open up for discussion in a few minutes. But a couple of items on housing. Housing, typically you would look at an inventory of housing to be maybe 4 to 6 months would be a normal real estate market. It's about 12 months now, so until the inventory of housing gets back into some kind of containable aspect of what a normal economy would be, we're going to still continue to see some concerns there. Relative to the stimulus package, and I might add, I'm not on the Federal Reserve anymore. I don't know if that was clear, but I got paid $200 a month, so I don't care if I lose my job or if I don't get invited back to the Fed anymore, and that's okay. There's a gentleman speaking at noon that I hope you will be at the luncheon, Dr. Dave Altick. He makes economics fun. He makes it to a level you can understand it. He's an advisor to Chairman Bernanke. I've spent many hours with him, and he understands, he presents, and he gives you a sense of how economics really works. But just a couple of broad brush comments. What's going on within the realm of the economy? Do we have what we hear as a credit crisis? Certainly that's been the case. And to bankers and financiers, I apologize, I'm going to give you a 10,000-foot flyover on this. Liquidity versus solvency. What you're really seeing in the market is, in the past, if someone went to borrow money or if they wanted to underwrite bonds, and I'm saying our construction business, the underwriting standard typically was a great balance sheet, a great income statement. You had assets, you had tangible assets, you had an income stream that appeared to be sustainable. Well, in this environment, I can tell you the underwriting standard has gone from solvency to liquidity. It's, do you have money in the bank? Do you have the ability to generate the income? Do you have the ability to pay your notes and so forth? So it's really a paradigm switch from solvency to liquidity in terms of the way people look at it. And we can talk about that in the Q&A a little bit later. But to the financial people in here, that's a generalized comment. So how has the Federal Reserve tried to put liquidity into the market? How has the Fed tried to increase the ability of the average person to go in and have loans that are available, to have car notes, to have tuitions, to have other things? They've gone in, and again in a broad brush comment, the way the Fed will put money in the market in a tight economy, when you're in a recessionary economy, for all intents and purposes, what they do is sell bonds into the market. It's all supply and demand. It's supply and demand, just like housing has gone down because there's an oversupply. Just like in September, the price of gas went up to $4 a gallon. For whatever reason it went up, I'm not sure, but supposedly it was supply and demand. Again, tight tight supply, high demand, prices up. Well, the Federal Reserve goes into the marketplace, into the money supply, and it goes in dealing with monetary policy. Congress does fiscal policy. Congress does taxing and spending, and they certainly appear to do a pretty good job of taxing and spending, I might add. But in terms of monetary, the Fed would put liquidity into the market by selling bonds in, bringing them from here, put them in the market, supply and demand, supply is high, prices go down on interest rates. Conversely, and hopefully we'll get to this position soon, if they want to tighten the economy down, if there are inflationary tendencies, if there are positions in the economy that need to be adjusted, they'll go in, again, buy bonds out of the market. That's close. Don't quiz me on that one too tight. But that's, as a generalized comment, that's how they do it. So supply and demand. Hopefully in the next year, you will see money supply decreasing. That's how the Fed has done it. The stimulus package that was alluded to earlier, you probably don't really want to know how I feel about it, because I'm going to tell you, it appears to be a sense of the comment social engineering was used. I can assure you that most people, most true economists, and certainly most businessmen look at stimulus as putting money in and then pulling it out. Think of the economy as a jet fighter. We went to an air show Saturday with the Thunderbirds and F-15s. They turn an afterburner on when they need a quick burst of energy, a quick burst of speed. They stimulate the jet. That's what stimulus should be. Stimulus should be moving into a marketplace, doing what needs to be done to avoid a train wreck, and then pulling it out. But it appears like most of what has been, if you will say, engineered into the stimulus package in many instances is a perpetual recurring expense that is going to be very hard, candidly, for the kids in this room and for their grandkids to deal with. I've got a friend here, Jim Corman, that is a professor in the business school, who made a comment to me in October. We were talking about many of these aspects of what was going on. He made a comment and he said, is the risk of not acting in terms of stimulus greater than the risk of acting? Well, certainly the risk of acting is you could have a deficit, you could have increased taxes, you could have many other things that would generate concerns within the economy. But it's the risk of not acting, the fact that the whole financial delivery system comes off the tracks. That was a real possibility in September and October. It was real when we were here in October. Susan made a comment in October that if the market dropped below roughly 7,200, and that's just a benchmark for consideration, where would the next floor be? Well, who knows where that floor really and truly might have been. It might have been 4,000, it might have been 5,000. It stopped in the mid-sixes, I believe, or low sixes so far. She may tell you about Douglas. There may be other aspects of it, but in terms of the economy, the Fed deals with many things. It deals with how to keep payment systems working, your checks clearing, the imaging of your checks, the money supply. And let me differentiate between banks. When we were talking about Wall Street bankers collapsing and imploding, the difference between a normal bank, the kind of bank that you would have your checking account, your savings accounts with, they're two different types of institutions. The Federal Reserve had oversight and regulatory ability over the typical banks that you would know as your banks. Colonial, obviously locally, that all of us know about, has some major challenges, but take that one off the table. Most banks, virtually every bank that you know, is in pretty doggone good shape. So those banks that are your normal banks are leveraged anywhere from 8 to 10 to 1 as a broad brush comment, meaning if, in simplistic terms, if they have $1 million in deposits, they can loan $10 million. 10 to 1 leverage, if you will. The Wall Street bankers typically were leveraged anywhere from 30 to 40 to 1. I saw one at 42 to 1. That meant basically there was perhaps as low as a 2 or 3% equity position. Well, in a rising market, that's, I won't say it's okay, but it was at least manageable and palatable as long as the market was rising. Once you started having contraction, once you started having deceleration in the marketplace, you suddenly saw a 2% margin suddenly becomes a 2% deficit, and that's where they got in trouble. So the difference between a bank and a Wall Street banker, major difference. Wall Street guys, as a rule, did not have regulatory other than SEC and other types of action. Now, they're very good, solid, prudent people such as Susan and others that have suggested, and I wish we had invested with her, we'd be a lot better off, I can assure you that. She was prudent, she was conservative, and she kept things in the realm of what was a real possibility of a return. So as you look into the marketplace, as you look into the aspects of where we're going, most people would tell you that most recessions look a little bit like a U. And I'm not an economist. My economics was 101 here with Dottie Shirley over in, those of you that know her, she would hold a cup of coffee in one hand, a cigarette in one hand. Jim, you had her. You stayed awake too because she'd call on you. You knew what was going on. She'd have a cup of coffee and a cigarette in one hand, chalk in her left hand. She'd walk across. Her husband was an OPOW from World War II. She'd get to the other side of the board. She would stop, change hands, and right back the other way, ambidextrous. That's where she taught us supply and demand. That's where you saw your typical recessionary curve being somewhat as a U. After 9/11, you saw a V. You saw an immediate drop, but then in the course of just a few months, it came back up very quickly. Dr. Dave Altig today at lunch will talk about an L. We went to a point and we dropped off, and the L is where we are now. We're just operating at a different level, at a, if you want to say a devalued economy. At whatever point it stabilizes, we'll see, are we at the bottom of the trough? Perhaps, I certainly hope so. But I think most people, most economists will tell you we've got somewhat of a long climb ahead of us. If we can stay where we are and then start inching up toward perhaps fourth quarter 09, perhaps early 2010, then we've got a good shot at making this work out. But I would encourage you to, as you look into the stimulus package, and Susan, I'm going to set you up for that comment. It's a concern that all of us have to look at, and all of us have to be somewhat concerned about whether it's what we really and truly want. I encourage you to get engaged with your congressmen, with your senators, with your local political and elected officials. Decide what government should provide. What is the role of government? What services should it provide? Should it be the first line defense, or should it be the last safety net? And I think most people that are running businesses, most people that are sustainable taxpayers would suggest government should be the last line safety net rather than the first line of defense. And it looks like there's been a shift in that general disposition among Congress and certainly among this administration, that perhaps we are looking at a first line defense from the government as opposed to the last safety net. And I've got my tea time on 10 minutes, Susan. I'm done, and I'll count in.
Okay, 10 minutes. I'm going to rip through this. For those of you that would like to hear more on what the background, because I am going to bullet point through this, we are doing a seminar up in the office, my office in Alexander City, on this exact topic, filling out the details tomorrow and on Thursday from noon to 1. Details outside at my booth if you would like to hear this. We did not discuss what we were going to say before we got up here, but I have to tell you, all three of us are on the same page. And that is really interesting, but we all see it alike. And it's different than what you've been hearing in the media over the last week, 2 or 3. First and foremost, the headline last year was that the stock market fell 50%. The headline, in my opinion, should have been that the bond market fell more and got crushed more than any time since the Great Depression. The operative phrase there is since the Great Depression. Most of what we are seeing right now is bigger, worse, anything that we've seen since the Great Depression. And Wall Street and Washington both have constantly, since the beginning of this, underestimated what is going on. And the reason that they have is that they keep trying to put it into the framework of what they've experienced in their careers, which is the 80s and the 90s. Wrong. The parallels here to the limit of what, and there are limited, of what we have are to the 30s and the 1930s in the US and into the 1990s of Japan. When you look at the economic data that's coming out, they'll say, this is the worst since 1974. Well, they just started keeping those records in 1974. This is the worst in 55 years. Well, they just started keeping those records 55 years ago. Again, we came on, hit it right on the head. We are in a situation that we have never been in before. And so when you hear all the Wall Street talking heads and all the experts prognosticate when the economy is going to come out of this and when the markets are coming out of this, they don't know. We've never been here before. We are facing incredibly difficult issues. I would argue that they are more difficult than what we faced in the Great Depression due to the interrelationships into the global nature and all that sort of thing. But no one knows when we're going to come out, and so that is the problem that we face. Last year, January of 2008, the experts that I was listening to that I thought made sense were predicting a very bad recession and a very bad bear market. And so I sounded like a crazy lady because I was reiterating what they were saying, predicting that major financial institutions would go under, that we needed to pull out of the market, got my clients almost completely out of the stock market in January of 2008 into short-term treasuries, where we have stayed to this day. I was saying that the Dow I thought would go at best to 10,000, at worst to 7,500, and of course that is what it did. What I do, when I started in the business in 1983, we were at a tail end of an 18-year period that had been very sideways, and you had to have a buy discipline, you had to have a sell discipline. Buy and hold hadn't worked for 18 years. You had to use what is a combination of technical and fundamental analysis. And most of the people on Wall Street have lost that ability, but that's what I use. You're not going to probably like what I have to tell you right now, but when I was in November when we did this, I said that if we broke through that 7,500 floor, that would not be a good indicator, and we did that. And to be quite blunt, my prediction, this is just my opinion. In other words, I think that unfortunately those technicals, that technical kind of aspect is telling us, confirming how bad the fundamentals are. My expectation is that we will go back, at best, we have to go back and retest those levels that we were just a month ago. That's a 20% drop from here. But we are substantially at risk. I'm not saying that this will happen, but we are substantially at risk of going down 50% in the stock market from here. I don't want to take that risk. No one knows what the bottom, when the bottom is going to happen. What I can tell you from 25 years of experience is that this is not what the bottom of the stock market feels like, sounds like, smells like, or looks like. Again, we've never been here before. The safe side thing to do is to err on the side of caution, to preserve capital so that you can then buy low. Let the bottom clearly happen. Stop trying, I wish these experts would stop trying to be a hero and pick the bottom. Let it happen. In Alabama, we have a saying, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. I want to be a pig. I don't want to be a hog. Let the bottom happen. Get into it 10 or 15%. The risk of, if we do go down 50%, then you have to go up 100% to get back even, which means you could, and I'm going to ride it through. Well, are you going to be content? Can you take the risk, if this happens, to just get back to where we are now 3 or 4 years from now? We've just had a bear market rally. In my opinion, it is a bear market rally based on it's a mirage. We are so starved for food, for good information. The housing market's improved. Baloney! A large part of that was the fact that February's home sales were better than January. Guess what? February home sales are always better than January's. If you plotted it out on a graph, January to December, January sales are the lowest, February's are better, March is better. It looks like a hill. That's why people put their houses in the market in the spring. And yet all of the media and so many economists are going, home sales are improving. Baloney! February, they will improve. Here's your 2 objective marks. Year-over-year numbers have to stop getting worse. And they haven't in anything that I've seen. And the government has to stop, when they revise their data, the revisions have to stop getting worse. Another example, durable goods. Everybody went, yay, February durable goods were up from January. They were up 3.4%. And January's had originally been reported as being down between 3 and 4%. Oh, whoops, nobody paid attention. Durable goods in January got revised downward 7.5%. So at the same time we're hooping and hollering that February was better than January, we're acknowledging that January was twice as bad as originally predicted. Again, we're down 28% on those durable goods in year over year. You've got to stop. Year over year has to stop getting worse. Revisions have to stop getting worse. On a technical basis, what I will be looking for to know that, to feel comfortable that the bottom of the stock market has happened, is first, my W. You have to have a valid retest, so you never get a V-shaped bottom in my experience. I can't find it ever in history where you get a V-shaped bottom in the market. You always go down, you come back up, and you come back down at least once, if not twice. It looks like a ping pong ball or a W. You have to get a valid retest. You have to get more buyers than sellers. A down market happens because the sellers outnumber the buyers. You cannot turn that long-term trend until the buyers start outnumbering the sellers. Duh. And so what happens with these bottoms is when the bottom finally happens, the selling is exhausted and the buyers are coming in like a cattle stampede. Third thing is that we cross up through a thing called the 200-day moving average. The bond market, I mentioned how it got crushed last year. That is a huge part. That is now showing evidence of bottoms. We had a divergence. We hit a new all-time low in the stock and in this cycle. In October for the bond and the stock market, same thing in November. In March when the stock market went to a new low, the bond market didn't, and that was a very important point. However, we still have a couple of risks out there that need to be looked at. What is the government going to do to rewrite the rules as we go through this GM situation, and what happens to the bondholders there? And also the government intervention risk. The government coming in and saying, fine, we'll help you, Chrysler, if Fiat buys you, and if you make green cars. I mean, we've got a different type of thing. Eastern Europe is a huge problem, and its implosion could really, really set us up for another global market meltdown. Actions speak louder than words. The public officials out there are having to try to talk confidence up. But when you look at major blue chip corporations, GE, Alcoa, International Paper, Ingersoll Rand, slashing their dividends 70 to 90%, those CEOs and boards of directors do not see things recovering in 3 to 6 months if they're doing that. The Fed taking its action, deciding to buy $300 billion worth of government bonds, something they haven't done anything like that for over 50 years. That says things aren't going to turn around quickly. They're having to do major actions they've never done before. Fast-track legislation in Congress to put into place a systemic risk regulator where they can take over Citigroup or Bank of America or major insurance companies or any other company that presents a systemic risk. That would need to be on fast-track status if there wasn't a substantial risk that things were going to fall apart from here further. The stress test that the banks are undergoing. So again, you've got a situation where in the process of this massive deleveraging that took 20 years to build, you don't take that back down of all the leverage that's been built in the system in a year or two. It took 20 years to build up. We have a major permanent downsizing in consumer spending. And again, that is something that took 20 or 30 years to build up. That doesn't go away overnight. So these huge adjustments, as Kayvon said, we're in a place we've never been before. And so no one can predict the bottom. Let it happen and make sure it's clearly happened because we are still in very treacherous waters. That's my Now we'll entertain questions for a few minutes.
If you were not fortunate enough to be one of your clients that took their money out of the stock market in 2008, you have a wide variety of stocks, large cap, small cap, you just have a wide variety of stocks. Are you better off in general selling your stock, moving your treasuries, what would you do if you took on a new client right now who came to you with a massive amount of stock?
First and foremost, you can't put it on autopilot, you can't put it in cookie cutter. It depends on the person's objectives, their time frame, their risk tolerance, and all of that. So in other words, what I do is I sit down and say, okay, let's look at you. We've got a 50% risk downside in the stock market. How much are you willing to risk on that? How comfortable do you feel with that? With individual stocks, what we're doing, we're putting stop losses underneath them so that if they do drop beyond a certain comfort level, then you're out to protect capital. It depends on your time frame. If someone said, no, I really don't, I can't ride this through for 4 or 5 years, I can't take that risk, then my advice is to get out now. If you do have a long-term time frame, you're in your 20s, or your 30s, or your 40s, and you've got the time frame to ride it through and the comfort level to ride it through, then that's, but I'm very much get out or put a stop loss underneath to protect capital, because the risks are still way too great in my opinion. I think we are at a temporary peak of the market and headed back down, so either get out or protect with stop losses. Yes, sir.
I have a question. The thing that's happening now, we're about inventory, i.e., if it's a commodity, if it's being the automobile business in a big way, that's the automobile industry, as inventories are starting to drop. Some of the guideposts that we often look at have to do with scrappage of vehicles and so on and so forth. Like currently, we're scrapping as many cars as we're selling in the United States for the last 4 years, or right ahead, especially in 08 and almost 07. The inventories are going to have to be rebuilt pretty quickly, because when many people, like ourselves, are on 45-day supply inventory, you eat that up pretty quickly. Even at a lower volume of product, we're still eating inventory very rapidly. Do you see an inventory buildup? Is that going to create jobs? And don't we have to have an inventory buildup very shortly, because we're almost exhausting those inventories?
At the current time, I think you are seeing bleed down of inventory. Dealers, many of your mercantile stores, many automobile people, they're sustaining cash flow by bleeding down inventory. They're selling, they're getting revenue, but they're not replenishing, which appears to be what you're suggesting. At what point will they have to rebuild them? When demand is there would be my sense of it. Susan mentioned that there has to be a shift when you're in the marketplace, in the equities market, when the buyers outnumber the sellers, and you're clearly not there in clothing, you're not there in retail. Automobiles are certainly hemorrhaging still at this point, not perhaps as bad as they were 2 months ago, but there's still a life support. I think you will see inventories turn at whatever point the consumer decides we're ready to buy. I don't know when that will be, but I don't think you're going to see major build-ups until they have to.
I'll just make one comment, and I know the numbers on Chrysler, I don't know the numbers on GM, but a month ago, according to the reports, many dealers, Chrysler dealers, had 5 months worth of inventory sitting on their lots. But at the same time, Chrysler itself, Chrysler Corporate, had 5 months of additional inventory already produced, sitting there. I mean, you have tons of cars just still sitting that are not on the dealer's lots. So we already had almost a year's worth of inventory made in a time of slowing sales. So I'm not sure that the inventories in the automobile side are really truly getting depleted. I have my doubts about that.
One quick add to maybe people like to talk about the savings rate. What's happened to it, and where do you think it's going, and what's the impact going to have on the increased savings rate of the American public?
Saving rates, let me quickly talk about that. Back in 1980, saving rate was close to about 7%. By last year, it was close to 0%. It's just creeping up to about 1 or 2%. So that's good news, but it's in a very kind of, depressing economy. That adds to the first question that we have, which is the inventory is depleting, but the shelves are not empty. There's still product on the shelves, there's still cars in the lot. So the turnaround is not happening that fast. Let me put it this way for you. We lost approximately $14 trillion worth of wealth. About 9 or 8 trillion in the stock market, about 5 trillion in the housing market in terms of the equity that get lost. That manifests itself in the buying, that manifests itself into the sort of going out there, the movies and everything, and saving. We are saving from smaller pie, and by itself, that's a problem. As wealth is shrinking, we're trying to save a little bit more because you're afraid. Today it was announced that there are more people that are behind their loan payment than ever. So you're seeing a lot of fundamental underneath this economy, which is percolating still. So all of those elements are up in the air, to be honest with you. I think the biggest question right now is the whole financial system that we put together, which is we run the deficit, we issue the bonds, the Chinese buy, we turn around and buy Chinese junk. The whole system that we have is under question. Can we do that? Will Chinese be tolerant? Can we underwrite the Chinese economic growth the way it was? We're basically questioning everything that we have learned in schools over the last 28 years.
Just briefly, as savings have increased, they have increased ever so slightly. That also has a concern, and it also exacerbates what is going into the general retail sales. So it's a plus. We've been encouraging people to save for years and years. They're doing it now, and now saying, well, maybe you ought to be spending. So interesting dilemma.
This is something I'm passionate about. I think Wall Street underestimated the financial crisis last year. Now they get it. They don't know what to do about it. I think they're underestimating now is that I think we are in the midst of a permanent slowdown in consumer spending, which will result in a permanent increase in saving. I think the baby boomers have gotten the ultimate wake-up call. Their houses are down. They didn't think that was possible. Their portfolios are down 50%. They can't retire when they plan to retire. They've got all this stuff. They've got all this debt. And all the numbers that predict that we're going to start rebounding in the second half of this year are counting on the fact that the consumer is going to go back to spending the way it used to. And I don't think that's Wall Street. Wall Street doesn't live on Main Street. And I think here on Main Street, we know that we're going through a structural shift. And so we're going to, like the Japanese did in the 1990s, I think we will see an increasing rate of saving and saving and saving, which means retail stores are going to hurt and hurt and hurt and hurt. And that's going to be also a restructuring of jobs as we lose a lot of those jobs in the auto and the retail industry that never get back created. So I think that the increase in savings is a huge trend that will continue.
The paradigm shift is going from credit society to a pay-as-you-go society, and that if we can stomach the hopefully a couple year differential between the two, it probably will be a healthier, stronger environment.
Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. One is that you suggested we engage with our politicians. Well, they do not know what to do. What do we tell them to do when we engage?
Don't spend what you don't have.
Okay, I agree with that. Okay, the second thing is, what do you tell small businesses who are going through this?
Well, I work for a company my wife owns. I might add, so for you women, a philanthropist, I'm a hired gun in a woman-owned business, which is okay. I either need a stimulus check or a severance package, and I don't think the severance is coming yet. So the answer you give small business, we make payroll. There are 9 taxes that we pay from PUTA to FICA every week on payroll, and it's a burden. It's a major burden. For every dollar an employee makes, we're paying about 40 cents out of some kind of ancillary benefit that goes generally into the U.S. Treasury. How it's dispersed, who knows? But what do you tell them? I mean, you got to be lean. My dad told me years ago that in any business, you need to decrease your continual expenses, your repetitive expenses 10% every year, because there's always going to be something that's increased. There's always going to be something that is part of the book of business that you're going to have to bring in as an overhead item. I would just say, be lean and cognizant that your customers are struggling just as you as a business are. And our receivables, we made money last year, but our receivables were like an accordion. We actually infused capital into our business last year simply because receivables stretched out. And these are good people that pay their bills, and they are paying their bills. So the 30-day account's gone to a 46 to 48-day account. That's what you're looking at. You just have to be patient.
I'm getting the hook. No more questions? Am I reading the sign language correctly? Okay. Okay. And so we're going to take a short break. We can start back here at 10 o'clock with Bert White.